For 9 months I carried a king's child and called him no one, and it was the silence that nearly cost me everything. I should tell you my name first, because so much of this story is about names, the ones we speak and the ones we swallow. I am Maeve Aldercott, and when this began, I was the healer of Thornwick, a village so small and so far up the river valley that the maps drawn in the capital did not trouble to mark it. We were 3 days' hard travel from the nearest town, and a world away from anything that mattered. A scatter of steadings and a mill and a chapel, and my little herb house at the edge of the woods. And I had lived there all my life, and expected to die there, unremarkable, having done nothing more with my years than set bones and birth babies, and ease the old ones out of the world. I was content with that. I want you to understand that I was content. I had my herbs and my craft and my quiet, and I had learned young, after my mother died and my father drank himself after her, that wanting more than the world means to give you is a fast road to grief. So I wanted little, and I kept my head down, and I healed who came to me, and that was my whole life, until the night the river brought me a dying man. It was autumn, the bad end of it, the season when the mountain rains come down and swell the thorn until it runs brown and fast and cruel. I was up past midnight with a poultice on the fire. Old Betton's leg had gone bad again, when I heard it over the roar of the water, not the river, but something in the river, a sound that was not water, a sound I had heard exactly twice before in my life, and never forgotten, the particular heavy wrongness of a body in a current. I took my lantern and I went down to the bank in the rain, because that is what a healer does. She goes toward the sound, even when every sensible bone in her says stay by the fire, and I found him snagged in the willow roots, at the bend below my house, half in and half out of the black water, and I thought he was dead. He was not dead. He was very close to it. He was an enormous man. I could not drag him. I had to rig a rope and a plank, and use the willow itself as a lever, and it took me the better part of an hour in the freezing rain. And when I finally had him up on the bank in the lantern light, I saw why the river had so nearly finished him. Someone had tried to finish him first. He had a wound in his side, a deep, clean wound, the kind a blade makes, packed with river silt and gone the wrong color at the edges. He had been in the water a long time. He was grey as ash and cold as the river, and his breath, when I put my cheek to his mouth to check for it, was so faint I nearly missed it. But it was there, and so I did what I have always done. I did not ask who he was, or how he came to have a blade wound in a river 3 days from anywhere, or whose enemy he might be, or what it might cost me to save him. I got him to my house, and I saved him. It took 4 days before he woke, and in those 4 days I learned his body the way a healer does. Not his name, which he could not tell me, but the map of him, and the map told me things. He was a fighting man. You do not get a body like that, all scar and hard use, sitting behind a plough. Old wounds, well healed, the kind that come from a life spent in harm's way. Good teeth, which the poor do not have. Hands that had held a sword far more than a hoe. And under the river filth, when I cut away the ruined shirt to get at the wound, cloth finer than anything that had ever come up the valley to Thornwick, a shirt that had cost more than my house, though it was torn and bloodied past saving now. Whoever he was no farmer and no vagrant. He was someone, and someone had wanted him dead badly enough to put a blade in him and trust the river to do the rest. I did not let myself wonder too hard about it. Wondering is the beginning of wanting, and I had trained myself out of both. I kept him alive. That was the task in front of me, and I did it, and on the 4th day the fever broke, and he opened his eyes. And I will not lie to you and say the earth moved, because it did not then. He was a sick man, and I was a tired healer, and the first thing he did was try to reach for a sword that was not there, and the second thing he did was pass out again from the pain of it. But he opened his eyes, and they were the darkest eyes I had ever seen, dark as the river at night, and something in me that had been asleep for a very long time turned over in its sleep, and did not quite wake, but stirred. He would not give me his name. That was the first strange thing. When he could speak, really speak, a day later, propped against my one good pillow, and looking too large and too dangerous for my small quiet house, I asked him, as you ask anyone, what he was called, and I watched him weigh it, watched a lifetime of caution move behind those dark eyes, and at last he said, "Ronan, just that." And I knew, the way I know a lie in a patient who says the pain is better when it is not, that Ronan was true but not the whole of it, that he had given me a real name stripped of everything that made it dangerous. I did not press. I had my own reasons for respecting a person's silences. The valley is full of people who came here to stop being who they were. "Ronan," I said, "I'm Maeve. You're in Thornwick, 3 days up the Thorn from anywhere, and someone put a blade in you and threw you in the river, and I've spent 4 days keeping you from dying of it. So whatever you're running from, it will keep till you can stand." And something eased in his face at that. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The relief of a hunted thing that has found, against all odds, a place where no one is asking the wrong questions. He stayed the winter. He had no choice. At first, the wound had been bad, and it healed slowly, and then the snows came and closed the valley the way they do every year, and no one goes down the Thorn in winter and lives. So he stayed, and I healed him, and somewhere in the long white months between the breaking of his fever and the breaking of the ice, the thing that had stirred in me woke all the way up, and I fell in love with a man whose name I did not know, and he, impossibly, because men like that do not love village healers, I told myself so every day, and it made no difference at all, he fell in love with me. I will not give you the whole of that winter, because some of it is mine, and a woman is allowed to keep some things, but I will give you the shape of it, because it matters. He was not what his body had led me to expect. The scars and the fine shirt and the sword hands had led me to expect a hard man, a killer, and there was that in him. I do not deny it. I saw it once or twice, a stillness that came over him at a sound outside, a way of placing himself between me and the door without seeming to move, but under it was something I had not expected at all, which was grief, and under the grief was a kind of loneliness, so deep and so old that it stopped my breath the first time I truly saw it. He was a man who had been carrying something alone for a very long time. He was a man who, I came to understand, was not used to being cared for, who flinched the first few times I changed his dressing, as though gentleness were a thing he had forgotten existed, who watched me move about my small house doing my small tasks with an expression I could not read until I finally understood it. He was watching a life he had never been allowed to have. A quiet one, a small one, a life where a person could simply be, and heal, and be cared for, without 10,000 people's lives hanging on his every choice. I did not understand that winter, what he was. I want to be clear about that, because everything after turns on it, the same way it turned on his swallowed name. I knew he was someone. I knew he was hunted. I thought, a lord perhaps, a great one fallen out with greater ones, a man with enemies and a price on his head, the kind of trouble that would ride up the valley in the spring and take him away from me. I braced for that. What I did not imagine, what I could not have imagined, was the truth, because the truth was too large for my small house to hold, that the man mending slowly by my fire, the man who had begun to smile at last, the man I had taken into my bed in the deep of winter, and into my heart long before that, was Ronan Blackmere, the alpha king of the whole realm, betrayed and left for dead by his own regent uncle, carried half alive down a mountain river into the one valley in the kingdom too small to have heard he was missing. He knew, of course. He knew the whole winter, and he did not tell me, and I have had a long time to make my peace with why, and I have made it, mostly. He did not tell me because for one winter, for the first time in his whole burdened life, he was not the king. He was only Ronan, a hurt man in a healer's house, loved for nothing but himself, and he could not bear to give that up one day sooner than he had to. It was selfish. He has told me himself, since, that it was selfish, that he had no right to my heart under a false name. But I understand it. Gods help me. I understand it. Because if I had been what he was, if I had spent my whole life being wanted for my crown and my power, and never once for myself, and if I had stumbled, half dead, into one winter where a woman looked at me and saw only a man worth saving, I do not know that I would have been strong enough to break it either. The ice broke in the spring, and with the breaking of the ice, the world came back up the valley, and the winter ended, and everything I had braced for came true, only worse, and larger, and more terrible than anything I had let myself imagine. He left in the spring. He had to. I understood that even then, before I knew the whole of it. Whatever he was running from, whatever had been left unfinished when the blade went into his side, it was calling him back, now that he could stand and ride, and I watched him wrestle with it for weeks as the snow retreated, the pull of the world against the pull of my small, quiet house, and I knew which would win, because it always wins, the world, against people like me. But before he went, on the last night, he did two things I have held to through everything that came after. The first was that he told me the truth, all of it. He sat me down by the fire on that last night, and he took both my hands, and he told me who he was, Ronan Blackmere, the king, betrayed by his uncle, the Lord Regent Aldous, knifed and thrown in the river, and believed dead these 6 months, while Aldous consolidated his grip on the throne. And I did not believe him, at first. I laughed. I thought it was some strange jest, until I saw his face, and then I believed him, and the believing was like the floor of the world dropping away. I had lain with the king. I had loved the king. I, Maeve Aldercott, healer of a village too small to be on the maps, had spent a winter loving the alpha king of the realm and calling him no one. The second thing he did was ask me to come with him, and I said no. I have been asked, since, by people who know the story, how I could possibly have said no. No to a king, no to the man I loved, no to a life beyond anything a valley healer could dream. And the answer is the truest and hardest thing in this whole account, so I will set it down plain. I said no because he was going back to a war. He was going back to a realm that believed him dead, to unseat an uncle who had already tried to murder him once and would certainly try again, and he did not know if he would live out the season, and he told me so, honestly, because by then, there were no more lies between us. He asked me to come, and what he was really asking was for me to come and stand beside a hunted king in the middle of a fight for a throne, and I looked at the truth of it, and I knew two things. I knew that I would only be a weakness to him there, one more person for Aldous to use against him, a village healer with no place in that world of blades and courts. And I knew, though I did not tell him this, could not, did not yet fully know it myself, that I might already be carrying something that I would die before I let anywhere near that war. Because I suspected, by that last night, that I was with child. I did not tell him. That is the silence this whole story is named for, and I will not pretend it was simple or wholly noble. I did not tell him because if I told him, he would not go. He would stay, or he would take me with him, and either way he would put himself and his throne at risk for me and the child, and I could not be the thing that cost him his kingdom or his life. And I did not tell him because a small, mean, frightened part of me thought, if he knows, he will feel bound, and I would rather he came back to me freely, if he came back at all, than out of duty to a child. So I let him go, believing there was nothing to bind him but love, and I stood at the bend in the river, where I had pulled him half dead from the water, and I watched the king ride down out of my valley, and back into his war, and I put my hand over my belly, where I had not yet let myself be sure, and I said nothing, and the saying nothing began. He said he would come back. He swore it, on that last night, with a fierceness that I chose to believe because the alternative was unbearable. When it is done, he said, when the throne is mine again, and it's safe, I will come back up this river for you, Maeve, if I have to swim it, and you will never draw your own water or set your own fires again, and I will spend the rest of my life being, for you, the man I was this winter, and not the king I have to be for everyone else. He said that, and then he rode away, and the spring turned to summer, and my belly grew, and no word came up the valley, no word of a king returned, no word of a war won or lost, no word of Ronan Blackmere at all, only the ordinary rumours that trickled up the thorn months late and garbled, that the Lord Regent Aldous ruled in the capital, that the young king was dead these many months, God rest him, that all was as it had been, dead. They still said he was dead, and I did not know if it was Aldous' lie still holding, or if it had, at last, become true. So I carried his child in silence, through the long summer, and into the autumn, a year almost to the day, from the night the river brought him to me, and I told no one whose child it was, because whose it was the most dangerous secret in the realm, and I had learned in one winter exactly how dangerous. To the village I was Maeve, the healer, who had taken up with the stranger who wintered with her, and been left with a babe when he moved on, which is a common enough story, and earned me a common enough measure of clucking pity, and I let them think it, because the truth, that the child growing in me was the heir of the Alpha King, the one thing in all the world that could threaten a usurper's grip on a stolen throne. The truth was a death sentence, for me and for the child both, if it ever reached the wrong ears. My son was born on a night of hard frost, and I named him Emrys, which had been my grandfather's name and belonged to no king, and I looked into his small dark eyes, his father's eyes, the river at night, and I made him a promise, in the silence of my herb house, with no one to hear it. I promised him I would keep him safe. I promised him that whatever his blood was, he would grow up a healer's son in a valley off the maps, loved and quiet and alive, and that I would never, ever, let the world that had put a blade in his father come up the river for him. I kept that promise for 2 years. And then, on a grey morning in the 3rd autumn, I was in the garden with Emrys on my hip, pulling the last of the root vegetables before the frost, and I heard it, the thing I had dreaded every single day for 3 years, the sound that did not belong in my valley, that had not been heard in Thornwick in living memory. Hooves. Many hooves. The heavy jingling thunder of armed and mounted men coming up the river road, more of them than had ever come up that road at once, riding hard and with purpose, and I stood in my garden, with my son on my hip, and the cold dirt on my hands, and my heart turning to ice, because there was only one thing that many armed men could be riding into a village off the maps to find. They had come for the king, which meant they had come, one way or another, for us. And I did not yet know, could not know, standing frozen in my garden as the soldiers poured into Thornwick with a hard-faced captain at their head, whether they were Ronan's men or Aldous', whether they had come to find the heir or to end him, whether the next words out of that captain's mouth would be my salvation or my death. I only knew that 3 years of silence was about to end, and that everything I loved was standing in a garden in the path of it. I set Emrys down behind me, in the shadow of the bean rows, and I told him in a whisper to be still, to be quiet, to be as small as he could be, the old lesson, the valley lesson, the one my whole life had taught me, and I stood up straight and turned to face the road, a healer with dirt on her hands, and I made ready to lie for my son's life. The captain reined up at my gate. He looked down at me from his tall horse, and his face was a soldier's face, giving away nothing, and he said the words I had spent 3 years praying I would never hear. "We're looking," he said, "for the king." I made my face into the face I had worn for 3 years, the face of a woman who healed fevers and set bones, and knew nothing of thrones. I wiped my hands on my apron slowly, the way a woman does when she is thinking of nothing more urgent than the mud on her palms. "There's no king in Thornwick," I said. "There's no king within 40 leagues of Thornwick. You've ridden a long way for a village that hasn't seen a lord since my grandmother was a girl." The captain did not smile, but something in his eyes shifted. Not suspicion exactly, but the wariness of a man who has been lied to before and expects to be lied to again. He was young for a captain, with a scar that pulled one corner of his mouth, and he sat his horse like a man who had not slept in days. Behind him, the 11 others waited, and I counted them, the way Ronan had once taught me to count anything dangerous, by looking without seeming to look. 11 mounted. Their tabards were mud-brown from the road, but under the mud, I could see the colour, and the colour was the thing that stopped my heart. Grey. Storm grey, with a thread of silver at the hem. Not the black and red of Aldous' men, not the colours that had come to me in 3 years of nightmares. The colours of the uncle who had knifed my winter guest and thrown him in the river to die. Grey and silver, Ronan's colours. The colours he had described to me on his last night, lying in the dark with his hand in my hair, telling me about a throne room he did not think he would ever see again. Storm grey, he had said, for the sky over Blackmere, in the season I was born. My mother chose it. It's the only thing of hers they didn't manage to take. I did not let any of this reach my face. I had learned, in my life, that the first lie must be told to your own body before it can be told to anyone else. That if your hands are steady and your breath is even, the words will follow. So I kept my hands steady. Grey riders, I said, as if noting the weather. You're a long way from wherever grey riders come from. Blackmere, the captain said. We ride for the crown of Blackmere. He leaned down from his saddle, and his voice dropped, and I heard in it something I had not expected. Not a threat, but a plea worn down to its bones. Woman, I'll be plain, because we've no time left for anything but plain. 3 years ago, the Lord Regent Aldous took the throne of Blackmere over the body of his own nephew, and he told the whole realm the king was dead. Drowned, he said, in the spring floods. God rest him. And half the realm believed it, and grieved, and bent the knee. But some of us did not believe it. Some of us served the king before Aldous ever oiled his way into the regency, and we knew the manner of the man, and we did not believe a river could kill Ronan Blackmere, any more than winter could kill a wolf. He straightened. We've been years finding the trail, years of whispers and dead ends, and men hanged for asking the wrong question. And the trail, the last true trail, the one that cost us the most to buy, ends here, at a village that isn't on any map. At the door of a healer who took in a half-drowned stranger, 3 winters gone, and told no one his name. 3 years. My careful arithmetic, the arithmetic I had done 1,000 times in the dark, the arithmetic I had sanded down to a widow's tidy timeline for the whole village, cracked open down the middle. 3 years since the river. 3 years since a stranger who called himself only Ronan had healed slow and strong under my roof and left me in the spring. And Emrys, my Emrys, sleeping now in the cottage behind me, Emrys was exactly the age that truth would make him. I had told the village I'd taken up with a travelling man who died. I had lied so long about the when of it that I had half believed my own lie. But the captain's arithmetic was the true arithmetic, and it put a knife to the throat of every careful story I had built. I've taken in a great many half-drowned strangers, I said. It's a river town. The thorn takes what it wants and gives back what it doesn't. I've pulled fishermen out of it, and a taxman once, and a boy who thought he could swim in the spring, melt, and learned he couldn't. If you've ridden years to ask me about a stranger, you'll have to be more particular than that. A big man, the captain said. Bigger than any of mine. Black hair, long, past his shoulders when it's not bound. Grey eyes, pale, like river ice. A scar here. He touched his own side, low, beneath the ribs, where a blade went in and was meant to stay in. He'd have come to you near dead, in the flood season 3 springs gone, and he'd have healed slow, and he'd have healed strong, and when he left you, he'd have gone east, toward the mountains, toward Blackmere, alone. Every word was Ronan. Every single word was the man who had slept in my bed and split my firewood and taught my hands a new kind of steadiness and left me a sun and a silence. I felt the ground tilt. I made it stop. And if such a man passed through, I said, 3 springs gone, what is he to you now? You say your king is dead, or your king is hiding. Which is it? Because a woman alone doesn't hand over the name of a guest to 12 armed men on the strength of a scar and a sad story. I've buried a father, and I've learned that men with swords and reasons are the most dangerous kind. So tell me true, Captain, if I had ever known such a man, why should I trust you with his memory?" The captain was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something I did not expect. He swung down from his horse, slowly, both hands visible, the way you dismount near a skittish animal. And he went down on one knee, in the mud of my yard, and behind him, one by one, all 11 of the grey riders did the same. 12 armed men, kneeling in the churned mud, outside a healer's cottage, in a village that wasn't on any map. "Because we found him," the captain said, and his voice broke on it. "A year passed, alive. He reached Blackmere under another name, and he has been building, quietly, in the mountains, the way he does everything, an army, out of the men Aldous wronged, and there are more of us than that snake ever dreamed. He's alive, healer, the king is alive, and when we told him the trail of his own lost winter led to a village on the Thorn, to a healer named, he stopped, and looked at me, and I saw that he already knew, that the name had been the last coin he was holding, named Maeve. He did not send us to fetch a witness. He sent us to fetch you. He has asked for you every day, they say, since we first found him. He thought you would not come the first time. He is done, he says, with not asking twice. The world went very quiet. The river went on behind me, saying the only thing it ever said. Somewhere in the cottage, small and clear, I heard a sound I would have known in my sleep, that I did know in my sleep, every night. My son, waking from his nap, calling the only word he called when he woke and did not see me. Mama. The captain heard it too. I watched him hear it. I watched him do, in the space of one breath, the same arithmetic I had done. The winter 3 springs gone, the healer named Maeve, the child in the cottage, exactly the age that made, and I watched his soldier's face come apart into something young and astonished and afraid. Mama, Emrys called again, closer, and then his small feet were on the threshold, and I turned, and there he was in the doorway, with sleep still creasing his cheek, and his dark hair standing up in a wild crown, and his eyes, pale grey, river ice grey, his father's eyes in a 2-year-old's face, blinking out at 12 kneeling strangers. There is no lie in the world large enough to cover a child with his father's eyes. I had known that from the first hour of his life. I had known, holding him wet and furious against my chest in the light of a single candle, that I had borne not a secret, but the end of a secret. That Emrys was the truth, walking around on fat little legs, and that no cloak I sewed, and no timeline I sanded smooth, would ever change the colour of his eyes. The captain rose. He did not come closer. He had that much sense. But he took off his helm, and he held it against his chest, and he looked at my son, the way men look at a thing they have crossed the whole world to find, and did not know, until this moment, that they were looking for. "My lord," he said, to a 2-year-old in a doorway, and his voice, when he said it, shook. I stepped between them. Of course I did. I would have stepped between my son and the sun if the sun had come too close, and I gathered Emrys up onto my hip, and he wound his fist into my hair the way he always did, and I faced the captain with my chin up, and my heart going like a hunted thing. "Say it plain," I told him. "All of it. Where he is. When. What road. Because if you have lied to me, if this is Aldous' cleverness, if you have come to draw out the king's woman, and the king's—" I could not say the word, not with Emrys's fist in my hair. "Then I will send you away with nothing, and you will never find this village again, because I will burn the only bridge over the thorn behind you, and this place will go back to being a rumour. But if you have told me true," my voice did the breaking now, the thing I had not allowed it to do in 3 years. "If he is alive, and if he asked for me, and if he is done not asking twice, then I have been waiting, Captain. God help me. I have been waiting 3 years for someone to ride up that road and tell me he did not die in the water. The captain told me true. He told me all of it, standing in my yard while the light went gold and long across the river, while I held my son, and my son stared at the horses with round eyes. He told me that Ronan had reached the mountain hold of Blackmere, half-starved, calling himself by his mother's maiden name, and had gone to a blacksmith who had served the old king and had put his true face to the man in the dark of the forge and said only, "You knew my father." He told me that the blacksmith had wept and then had begun, that very night, to send word out along the routes of the mountains, to the exiled, the dispossessed, the men Aldous had ruined, and the women Aldous had widowed, and that the word had run under the surface of the realm, like water under ice, and that now, 3 years after a river was supposed to have ended him, Ronan Blackmere had 4,000 men in the high valleys, and a claim written in his own blood, and his uncle's crimes, and one thing missing from it, one thing he asked after every single day. "He never described you as a woman he loved," the captain said, quietly, at the end. "He's a private man. He'd sooner die than say it to soldiers. He described you as the reason he was alive to want the throne back." He said. The captain almost smiled, the scar pulling. He said, "She pulled me out of the river, and then she pulled me out of everything else, and I left her to keep her out of a war, and it was the only truly stupid thing I have ever done, and I mean to correct it." I laughed. It came out wet and broken, and I did not care. Emrys, alarmed by his mother's strange face, patted my cheek with a firm little hand, and the captain looked at that small hand and looked away, blinking, a soldier's throat working. "He doesn't know," I said. It was not a question. It couldn't be. I had told no one. I had walked to no town, sent no letter, whispered it to no travelling tinker. The only ones who knew that Emrys had a father with grey eyes and a stolen throne were me and the river, and now, 3 heartbeats too late to unsay it, 12 grey-cloaked men kneeling in my mud. "He does not know," the captain agreed, gently. "He does not know there is a son." He looked at Emrys again, and this time he did not look away. "But when he sees those eyes, my lady, he will not need to be told. No man on earth would need to be told." My lady. The words landed on me strange and heavy, a cloak in a colour I had refused once and was being handed again. I had said no to Ronan 3 years ago in the dark. I had said no to be brave. No to keep from being the weakness they used against him. No to send him into his war, unburdened by a healer he'd have had to defend. I had thought it was the loving thing, the strong thing, and it had been. For him, maybe, for a while. But I had made that choice for 2, and there had turned out to be 3 of us, and the third one had had no say, and the third one had his father's eyes, and the third one deserved to know the man whose eyes he wore. I made my choice standing in the mud with my son on my hip. I made it the way I had made every real choice of my life, fast and complete, and with no going back. "Then we ride to him," I said. "Tomorrow, at first light, if the horses can bear it. But you'll do it my way, Captain, or you'll do it without us." I shifted Emrys higher. "First, no man of yours says the word king within a mile of my son until his father has said it to his face. He is a healer's boy from Thornwick until Ronan Blackmere tells him otherwise. That is his father's right, and no one takes it from him. Second, if we ride into anything but the truth, if there is a trap under any part of this, you die first, and you die knowing you led a woman and a child into it. Do you understand me?" "I understand you," the captain said. And then, softly, with the ghost of that scarred smile, "He said you'd be like this. He said, she'll agree, and then she'll set terms, and the terms will be better than anything I'd have thought of, and I'll wish I'd married her before I left." The captain inclined his head. "For what it's worth, my lady, the king was right about the terms. I packed what a healer packs, which is not much. My needles, and my dried herbs, the good knife, the small store of coin I had saved, the blanket Emrys would not sleep without. I stood a moment in the one room where my son had been born, where I had wintered with a stranger and fallen in love with him, and let him go, and raised his boy alone. And I said goodbye to it, the way you say goodbye to a place that has been both a prison and a sanctuary, with gratitude and with relief, in exactly equal measure. Then I latched the door on 3 years of silence, and in the grey light before dawn, I carried my son out to the grey riders, and we turned east, toward the mountains, toward Blackmere, toward the man the river had failed to keep. The ride took 11 days. I will not pretend it was easy. Emrys had never been beyond the sound of the thorn, and for the first 2 days he wept for the river, the way I imagine I had once wept for things I could not name. And I held him through it on the front of the captain's saddle, for the grey riders would not let me ride alone, would not let the king's woman and the king's son out of the ring of them for a single mile. By the 3rd day, Emrys had decided the horses were the finest thing that had ever happened to a boy, and by the 5th, he had a favourite among the riders, a huge, silent northerner named Bran, who let him hold the reins, and taught him, gravely, the names of the mountains, as they rose blue and then white on the eastern edge of the world. I watched my son learn the shape of his father's country from a soldier's shoulders, and I thought, he has been a secret his whole life, and now he is riding under an open sky, with an escort of 12, and he does not know that the whole balance of a kingdom is riding with him. Let him not know. Let him have these 11 days of being only a boy who likes horses. For myself, I had the 11 days to be afraid. I was afraid of the war, for the captain did not hide that we were riding toward one, that Aldous still held the Low Country and the true throne room and the great city of Blackmere itself, and that Ronan's 4,000 held the high valleys and were waiting, sharpening, for the season and the moment. I was afraid of the throne, of what a woman like me, a healer from a village not on any map, would be in a court, and whether I could survive it, and whether I would want to. But most of all, and I am ashamed of it, and I will say it anyway, I was afraid of Ronan. I was afraid he had changed. 3 years is a long time, and a throne is a heavy thing, and the man I had loved had been a man stripped down to nothing. No crown, no name, no army, no country. A man reduced to only himself, split wood, and steady hands, and a low voice in the dark. That man I had known to the bottom, but the man at the end of this ride was a king again, or nearly, with 4,000 swords and a claim written in blood, and I did not know that man, and I was afraid that when he looked at me, he would see only the healer he had left in the river town, the small chapter of his weakness, and not want the reminder. I was afraid he had asked for me the way you ask after a debt. I was afraid I was riding 11 days to be thanked. And I was afraid, most of all, worst of all, the fear I could not say even to Bran in the dark, of the moment he saw Emrys, of the moment he did the arithmetic, of what a king does when a healer arrives with a 2-year-old who has his eyes and a story she never sent. I had made the choice not to tell him. I had made it alone, and I had made it for what I still believed were good reasons, and I did not know if he would understand that, or if he would see only the years he had lost, the son grown from a baby to a boy without him, the choice I had taken out of his hands, the way I'd sworn I would never let anyone take a choice out of mine. On the 8th night, lying awake with Emrys warm against my side, and the fires of the grey riders burning low around us, I let myself wonder for the first time whether I had only been protecting myself, whether the no I had told Ronan 3 years ago had been less about his war and more about my own terror of being left, of loving a king and being set aside for a crown, of choosing to be the one who left first, so that I would never have to be the one who was left. I did not like the shape of that thought. I turned it over and over in the dark, and I could not make it lie flat. On the 11th day we came up through a pass, where the snow lay in the shadows even in summer, and the captain reined up at the crest, and below us, filling a high green valley, cupped between white peaks, was the camp of the king, who was supposed to be dead. It was vast. I had not truly believed 4,000 until I saw 4,000, the tents in their ordered rows, the smoke of the cook fires, the horse lines, the banners, storm-grey banners with a thread of silver, hundreds of them, moving in the mountain wind. And at the centre, on a rise, a great grey tent, taller than the rest, with the largest banner of all, and something in me, Some animal thing, something older than fear or arithmetic, knew before my eyes could confirm it that he was in there, that the river had carried him here, that 11 days and 3 years and one whole life had been leading to the green valley below. Emrys, on Bran's saddle, pointed at the banners with his whole arm and shouted, delighted, "Birds!" For the silver thread caught the sun and flashed like wings, and every rider within earshot went utterly still, because the boy did not know, could not know, that he was pointing at his own house, his own colours, the storm grey his grandmother had chosen, because it was the only thing they could not take. "Not birds, little lord," Bran said, very low, so only Emrys and I could hear. "Home." We rode down into the valley, and the camp saw us coming. I had not expected that. I had thought, in whatever picture I had built on the ride, that we would slip in quietly, that I would be taken to a tent and made to wait, that there would be time to arrange my face and my son and my 3 years of silence into something I could carry through a door. But a healer, and a captain, and 11 grey riders coming down out of the pass do not go unremarked in a camp that has been holding its breath for a season. And by the time we reached the first tents, there were men standing to watch us pass, and by the time we reached the second row, there were more. And the word ran ahead of us the way word runs, the captain's back. They must have found something. Look, there's a woman, there's a child, and I felt 4,000 eyes turn toward me, and I sat very straight and held my son, and did not let my face do anything at all. It was the horse lines where he saw us, or where we saw him. I have gone over that moment so many times that I no longer trust the order of it, but I know that I looked up toward the great grey tent on its rise, and the flap of it was thrown back, and a man came out of it fast, at a near run, in his shirt sleeves with no crown, and no cloak, and no ceremony at all. A big man, bigger than any of them, with black hair loose past his shoulders, and I knew him. 3 years and 4,000 men, and a stolen throne, and I knew him in the space between 2 heartbeats, the way you know your own name called across a crowd. Ronan, my Ronan, the stranger the river gave me. He stopped at the edge of the horse lines. He had been running, and he stopped as if he had walked into a wall, and I watched him see me, and I watched everything I had been afraid of on the ride turn out to be wrong. He did not look at me like a debt. He did not look at me like a chapter of his weakness he'd rather not reread. He looked at me the way I had once looked at him across a winter, as if the rest of the world had gone quiet and small, and there was only this, only the 2 of us, and the thing between us that neither distance nor a crown had managed to kill. His face, that grave, closed, careful face I had spent a winter learning to open, came apart entirely, and I saw the king fall off him like a wet cloak, and there was only the man, only Ronan, looking at me as if I were the water, and he were the one who had been 3 years thirsty. And then his eyes went to the child on my hip. I felt the whole camp feel it. I felt 4,000 men go still, though they could not have known, could not have understood, only felt the way a crowd feels lightning before it hears the thunder. I watched Ronan Blackmere look at the boy in my arms, at the dark hair standing up in its wild crown, at the small stubborn set of the jaw, at the eyes, the pale river ice grey eyes that were his own eyes, looking back at him out of a 2-year-old's face, and I watched him do the arithmetic. I watched 3 years and 11 days and 1 winter resolve, behind his eyes, into a sum. And I watched him understand, in a single, terrible, wonderful instant, that the healer he had left in a river town had not come alone, that she had never truly been alone, that she had carried out of that winter something he had not known to grieve because he had not known it existed. He crossed the last of the ground between us slowly, not the run of before. Slow, careful, both hands a little open at his sides, the way you approach a skittish animal, the way his own captain had dismounted in my yard, and I understood that he had learned that gentleness somewhere, in some hard place, and I understood too that he was approaching not me but the boy, that he had grasped without being told that the boy was the skittish thing here, the thing that must not be frightened, the thing that must be allowed to choose. He stopped beside my horse. Up close he was older. There was grey in the black at his temples now, and lines at the corners of his eyes that a winter had not put there, and the winter's leanness had become a harder, more finished thing. But it was him. It was his warmth coming off him. It was his low voice when he finally spoke, and he did not speak to me. He spoke to Emrys. "Hello," he said. Just that. Soft and low and careful. A big man making himself small. The old lesson. The valley lesson. The one his whole life had taught him. "What's your name?" Emrys, who was shy of no one, who had charmed 12 hard soldiers in 11 days, looked at this new large person with the interesting hair and considered him with the grave attention 2-year-olds give to things that matter. Then he said, clearly, proudly, "Emrys." And, because he had learned it from Bran, and was proud of that too, he pointed at the banners and announced, "Birds home." Ronan Blackmere made a sound I had never heard him make. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when a thing he did not let himself hope for turns out to be standing in front of him, saying its own name, pointing at its own colours, and calling them home without knowing why. He put one hand over his mouth. His eyes, over his hand, were wet and bright and fixed on the boy, and then they came up to me, and there was in them a question so large and so frightened and so full of 3 years of not knowing that I could not have refused to answer it if I had wanted to. "He's yours," I said. My voice was steadier than I had any right to expect. "He was born the winter after you left. I named him Emrys, for your mother's father. You told me once. The night of the fever. You told me the name. I don't think you remember telling me. I didn't send word. I want to tell you why. And it's a coward's reason, dressed as a brave one. And you may be angry, and you'll have the right. But not now. Not here, in front of your army. Right now, all I'll say is," and here my own voice finally broke clean through. 3 years of silence coming apart all at once. "Right now, all I'll say is, his name is Emrys, and he has your eyes, and he has never once had a father, and I have brought him 11 days across the mountains so that he could have one before it's too late. So, here he is, here we both are." Ronan reached up. He did it slowly, still, watching the boy for permission, and Emrys, my sociable, fearless, river-born boy, leaned toward him with the easy trust of a child who has never yet learned to be afraid, and Ronan took his son into his arms for the first time, and the boy fit against his chest, as if he had always been there, as if the shape of that big man had been carved around exactly that small weight, and Ronan bowed his head over his son's dark hair, and stood there, in the middle of his own camp, in front of 4,000 men, and wept without a single sound. The camp did not cheer. I have thought about that, since. 4,000 hard men, and their lost king weeping over a child in the horse lines, and not one of them cheered, because it was not a thing to cheer. It was a thing to witness. And so they witnessed it, silent, bareheaded, many of them weeping too, hard men who had lost their own children and homes to the same snake who had stolen this man's throne, and the mountain wind moved the storm-grey banners, and my son, alarmed to find the large person shaking, patted Ronan's wet cheek with a firm little hand, exactly as he had patted mine, and said, with 2-year-old authority, "No cry." "No," Ronan agreed, laughing and weeping at once, his voice wrecked. "No cry. You're right. No more crying." He lifted his head and looked at me over our son's crown of dark hair, and whatever he had been going to say, he did not say it there. He only reached out his free hand, and I took it, and he pulled me down off the horse and into the circle of the 2 of them, and the 3 of us stood there in the churned mud of the horse lines with the whole army watching, and I put my face against his shoulder in the old place, the winter place, and I breathed him in, and I was, after 3 years of being the strongest woman in a village not on any map, for one moment, not strong at all, just held. We talked that night, when the camp had given us the privacy that a whole camp can somehow arrange when it decides to, and Emrys was asleep at last, on a cot heaped with grey furs, worn out with wonder, his fist wound into the edge of a blanket that was not his river blanket, but that he had accepted as an adequate substitute. Ronan sat by the cot and could not stop looking at him. I sat across the small fire and made myself say the thing I had come to say. "I need to tell you why I didn't send word," I said. "You deserve to hear it before you decide anything about me, about us." "Maeve." "No, let me. I've had 3 years to build it and 11 days to take it apart, so let me say it while it's honest." I looked at the fire, not at him. It was easier. "When you told me who you were, that last night, and asked me to come, I said no, because I told you I'd be a weakness in your war. That was true. It was even wise. But it wasn't the whole of it, and I've only just been brave enough to see the rest. So here's the rest. I said no because I was afraid, not of the war, of you, of loving a king and being kept in a small house at the edge of things, and set aside the day the crown needed something a healer couldn't give. My mother loved a man who left her a widow in her own heart, long before he died, and I swore I'd never love anything that could leave me like that. And then the river gave me you, and I loved you anyway, and it terrified me. So when you left, I told myself I was being noble, but really I was doing the thing I'd always done. I was leaving first. I was making myself the one who let go, so that I could never be the one who was let go of. And then I found out I was carrying Emrys, and by then, the leaving first had a name and a face, and I told myself the silence was to protect him, to protect you, and maybe part of it was. But part of it, Ronan, was just a frightened woman who had decided long ago that wanting things was a fast road to grief, and could not unlearn it even for you, even for him. I made myself look up. That's the coward's reason under the brave one. You should know it before you build anything on me. Ronan was quiet a long time. The fire ticked. Emrys sighed in his sleep, the way he did. "When they knifed me," he said at last, slowly, "and I went into that river, the last clear thought I had, before the cold took the thinking out of me, was that I had never once in my whole life let anyone all the way in. I'd been guarded from the cradle, a prince, then a king, surrounded by people who wanted the crown and learned to want it through me. I trusted my uncle. That was the one wall I let down, and he put a knife through the gap. So I thought, going into the water, at least I never gave anyone the real thing to betray. At least I die whole." He shook his head. "And then I woke up in a healer's house at the edge of the world, and I had no crown and no name and no army, and nothing at all to guard. And there was this woman who didn't want the throne because she didn't know there was a throne, who fed me and mended me and argued with me and made me split her firewood. And for the first time in my life, I let someone all the way in. Not because I was brave, Maeve, but because I had nothing left to protect. I was already stripped to the bone, and I found out that the thing I'd spent my whole life guarding wasn't worth guarding half so much as the thing I found when I stopped." He looked at me, and the firelight was in his grey eyes. "So, don't tell me about frightened people who decide that wanting is a road to grief. I invented that road. I paved it. I just got knocked off it by a river and a healer, and I have spent 3 years trying to get back to the one place I was ever whole. And now I get here, and you tell me you were afraid. And Maeve," his voice roughened, "of course you were afraid. So was I. We were 2 people who'd both decided love was a weakness, and we were both wrong, and it took a knife and a river and a war to teach us. And I am not going to waste the lesson being angry that you're as broken in the same place as I am. You didn't send word. It cost me 2 years of my son's life, and I'll grieve those, and then I'll be done grieving them, because you also kept him alive and safe and happy, in the one corner of the realm my uncle would never think to look. And you brought him to me, the moment it was true instead of safe. That's not a coward. That's the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me." I did not have an answer to that. I had come prepared to be forgiven, perhaps, or blamed, and I had not come prepared to be understood, and it undid me more than either would have. "I'm asking again," Ronan said, "because I told them I was done not asking twice." He came around the fire and knelt in front of me. "This king, This man the river gave me, and he took both my hands, and behind him, our son slept under grey firs, in the light of a war camp. Not to a house at the edge of things, not to be kept small and set aside. Come and be my queen, and my mate, and the mother of my heir openly, in the sight of everyone, sharing the weight and the danger, and every hard decision, because a healer who kept a king alive, and a kingdom's future safe for 3 years by herself, is exactly the woman I want beside me when I take back what's mine. Marry me, Maeve. Say yes this time. I have loved you since a winter in a house that isn't on any map, and I am done. I am so completely done, being whole only in secret. Yes, I said. This time I said yes. It was the easiest word I have ever spoken, and the hardest one. Yes. God, yes. 3 years too late. Yes. He kissed me then, and it was the winter, and it was the mountain, and it was 3 years of silence ending all at once. And it was, I will say it plainly, because this is a love story, and I have earned the right. It was the beginning of everything. The silence had almost cost us both. We were mated under a mountain moon, 3 nights later. I had not fully understood, before I came to Blackmere, what a mate bond was among Ronan's people. I had thought it a marriage, a ceremony, a word. It is more than that. It is older than crowns, and deeper than vows. The wolf in him, and the wolf that had always slept, unwaked, in me. For I learned, that spring, that healers of the old river valleys carry a thin strain of the blood, which is perhaps why the river brought him to my door, and not another's. The 2 of them recognized each other the way the boy had recognized the banners, without being taught. There is a moment in the bonding, when the marks rise on the skin, silver pale as the thread in his banners, when 2 people stop being 2. I had spent my whole life making myself small and separate and safe. The bond unmade all of it in a single night, and I was not afraid, and that absence of fear was itself the strangest and sweetest thing, to be joined all the way to another soul, and to feel, for the first time in my life, not trapped, but home. Emrys slept through the whole of it in Bran's enormous careful keeping, and woke the next morning to find that his mother and the large weeping person from the horse lines were somehow, overnight, a single unit, a thing he could climb between and be held by from both sides at once, and he approved of this arrangement with the total pragmatism of the very young. Within a week he called Ronan not the big man, but Da, and the first time he did it, casually, over a bowl of porridge, demanding more honey. I watched the King of Blackmere, who had faced a knife and a river and the theft of his whole life without breaking, have to leave the tent for a moment to compose himself. There was a night, in that first week, that I hold apart from all the rest. The bond was still new and strange, and I woke in the deep of the dark not knowing where I was, in a war camp under a mountain, with a king's arm heavy across me and a child breathing in the corner, and for one animal moment, the old fear rose up whole, that I did not belong here, that I was a river healer playing at a life that would be taken from me the moment the crown remembered what it was owed. And Ronan, half asleep, feeling the fear move through the bond before I could hide it. For that is the thing about the bond, that it does not permit the small private lies I had lived my whole life inside of, tightened his arm and said, into my hair, without fully waking, "Stop. You're allowed to be here. Go back to sleep." And I lay in the dark, and understood that I would never again be able to be quietly afraid beside this man, that he would always feel it, that the small safe separateness I had guarded my whole life was simply gone. It should have terrified me. Instead, I felt the fear go out of me like water out of a cupped hand, and I slept. And in the morning, Emrys climbed over both of us demanding the day, and it was the first morning of my life that I woke, without any part of me braced against loss. I learned the camp that week, and the camp learned me. There were those among Ronan's lords who did not know what to make of a queen who set bones, who had expected, when the captain rode out for the king's lost winter, that he might return with a high-born lady or a political marriage, and who found instead a river healer in a plain gown with dirt under her nails, and a fearless commoner child on her hip. Some of them warmed to me slowly. Some of them warmed to me all at once. On the third day, when the old lord's grandson took a fever in the night, and 3 camp physicians stood over him arguing while the boy burned, and I pushed between them and did what a healer does, and broke the fever by dawn, and the old lord, who had looked at me the day I arrived as if I were a stain on the king's honor, came to my tent at first light with his hat in his hands, and could not find the words and did not need to. After that, the eyebrows stopped. A woman who can be feared in a council chamber is one thing. A woman who has saved your grandson with her own 2 hands in the dark is another, and the second kind of respect is the only kind I have ever wanted. But there was still a war. I want to be honest about that too, because the songs will smooth it, and I was there, and it was not smooth. Ronan's 4,000 held the high valleys, but Aldous held the low country, and the great walled city of Blackmere, and the throne room, with the storm-grey throne my love had been born to sit in, and Aldous had held it for 3 years, and men who have held a stolen thing for 3 years do not give it back for the asking. There would be a battle. I had known it on the ride, and I knew it more sharply now, lying beside my mate in the dark, and feeling, through the new bond, the weight of it on him. 4,000 men who had followed him out of the ashes of their own ruin, and every one of their lives balanced on the choices he would make in the coming weeks. I did not sit in a tent and wait. I had told him I would not be kept small and set aside, and he had told me he did not want me to be, and we both meant it. I was a healer, the best either army had, low country or high, and I did what a healer does before a battle, which is prepare to save the men who will bleed for it. I organized the camp's physicians, who had been each hoarding their own little store of knowledge, into something that worked together. I laid in stores of clean linen and boiled thread, and the herbs that fight the wound rot, that kills more soldiers than any blade. I taught the wives and the camp followers, who were many, how to close a wound and slow a bleed, so that when it came, there would be 100 trained hands instead of 10. And in the councils, for Ronan brought me to the councils, over the raised eyebrows of some of his lords, and silenced the eyebrows with a single look. I said little, because I knew nothing of war, but I said one thing that mattered. You keep speaking of taking the city, I said, into a tent full of grey-cloaked lords arguing over walls and gates and the season for a siege. But you were born in that city. Half the men behind those walls are men who bent the knee to Aldous because they were told you were dead and had no other king to bend to. You don't need to take the city from them. You need to give them their king back. Show them you're alive. Show them the boy. Let the walls decide whether they'd rather keep out the true king and his heir, or open the gate. There was a long silence in the tent. Then an old lord, the same one whose eyebrows had climbed highest at my presence, inclined his head to me slowly and said, "The healer sees clearer than the generals." And Ronan, at the head of the table, looked at me with something in his grey eyes that I would carry all my life, and said, "She usually does." So it was not, in the end, a great slaughter. It was cleverer, and stranger, and better than that. Ronan brought his 4,000 down out of the mountains, and did not lay siege. He encamped in full view of the city, banners flying, and he sent no threat, and no demand. He sent, instead, the truth, in 100 forms, heralds who read out the roll of Aldous' crimes in the market towns, the blacksmith, who had known the old king, standing on a cart, and telling anyone who would listen how the boy king he'd shod horses for had come to him alive out of the mountains. And finally, when the low country was humming with it, Ronan himself, riding to within a bowshot of the city gate, under a flag of parley, bareheaded so every man on the wall could see his face, the face of the king they had buried, and lifting up in his arms, for the whole city to see, a small, dark-haired boy with the king's own grey eyes. "I am Ronan Blackmere," he called up to the walls, in that low voice that somehow carried, "son of your king, and your king by right. My uncle put a knife in me and threw me in the river, and told you I was dead, so that he could sit in my father's chair. He lied. I am alive. And this, he lifted Emrys higher, and my son, delighted to be so high and so looked at, laughed and waved at the walls with his whole arm. This is my son, the heir of Blackmere, and I have brought him home. I have no quarrel with the men on this wall. You were lied to. So was half the realm. I ask only this: open the gate, and let the city choose its king in the light, and no man who opens it will answer for having once believed a liar. But keep it shut for a usurper who murdered his own blood, and answer to your own children for it. You have until the sun touches the western peaks. Choose. The gate opened before the sun was halfway down. It was not quite bloodless. Aldous' household guard, the men who had risen with him and would fall with him, fought at the palace itself. And there I did my true work, in a hall turned to a surgery, up to my elbows in the price of a throne. And I lost some, and I saved more, and I did not have the luxury of being afraid, because there were hands that needed my hands. But the city itself opened like a fist unclenching. A people of Blackmere had grieved their king once. They were not, it turned out, willing to lose him twice to keep the man who had stolen him. They poured out into the streets. They lifted my son onto shoulders and passed him through the crowd like a blessing, which frightened me half to death, until I saw that a dozen grey riders moved with him through the throng. Bran's great hand, never more than an arm's length from the boy. And by nightfall, the storm-grey banners flew from the walls of Blackmere, and the throne room was Ronan's again, and it was over. I will remember that hall of blood as long as I remember anything. It was a feasting hall once, a place built for candlelight and music, and we turned it into a place where men were mended or lost, and I moved through it all that long night with my sleeves bound up and my hands never still. And the girls I had trained in the camp moved with me, camp wives, soldiers' daughters, common women who 3 weeks before had known nothing, and who now closed wounds and slowed bleeds with steady hands, because I had taught them that steadiness is a thing you decide on before your hands can learn it. We saved a boy of 16 who had opened his own leg on a fallen pike. We saved a grey rider I had ridden 11 days beside. We lost a man whose wound I could not reach in time, and I closed his eyes myself and did not let the others see me do anything but the next necessary thing, because a healer who breaks in front of her people takes their hands away with her own. And near dawn, Ronan came to the door of that hall, still in his battle-stained mail, and found me elbow-deep in the cost of his crown, and he did not say a word. He only crossed the whole bloody room and put his forehead against mine for one breath, king to healer, mate to mate, and then he took up a basin and a cloth and began, silently, to help me, the king of Blackmere, on the first night of his reign, washing wounds beside the common women in a hall of blood. And I loved him then, past any word I have for it. Aldous did not die on a blade. I have wondered whether that was mercy or its opposite. He was taken alive in the collapse of his guard, and Ronan, who I had half feared, would kill him with his own hands, and who told me later he had wanted to, in the throne room, with everyone watching, did not. I thought about it, he said to me that night, exhausted, his head in my lap. I stood over him, and I thought about the river, and the cold, and the 2 years of Emrys I'll never get back. And I wanted it more than I've ever wanted anything. And then I thought, that's the road he put me on. If I kill my own blood to keep this chair, I'm him. I'm just the version that won. So Aldous was not killed. He was stripped of name and title and lands, as he had once stripped Ronan, and he was sent, under heavy guard, to live out his years, to a cold stone keep in the far north, alone, with a window that looked out on nothing but snow, and the knowledge that the nephew he had murdered had lived, and loved, and won, and chosen not to become him. I am told he did not last many winters. I did not grieve him, but I understood, watching my mate refuse to become the thing that had made him, exactly why the river had chosen his door and not another's. The coronation was a great and golden thing, and I will not spend long on it, because the truth is that the moment that mattered to me was not the crown. It was the moment, in the throne room of Blackmere, under the banners, and before the whole assembled realm, when Ronan Blackmere was crowned king a second time. And then, instead of taking his throne, he came down the steps to where I stood, in a gown I did not know how to wear, holding our son. And he took Emrys from my arms, and set the boy on his own shoulders, and he took my hand, and he led me up the steps and set me beside him, and he said, so that the whole hall heard it, "There has been enough silence in this house, so hear this plainly, all of you, and carry it to every corner of the realm. This is Maeve, healer of the river valley, who pulled me from the water when I was no one, who sheltered your king when he had no crown and no name, who bore and raised the heir of Blackmere, alone in secret, to keep him safe from the man who wanted us all dead, and who is my mate, bonded, before the moon and the old law, beyond the power of any man here to question. She is your queen. Not the king's kept woman, not a healer given a title. Your queen, who has already saved more of you than my sword ever will. Kneel to her as you kneel to me, or do not trouble to kneel to me at all. And the great hall of Blackmere, the hall from which my son had once, from a war camp on the far side of the mountains, called home without knowing why, knelt. We were wed properly not long after, in the low country way that the people wanted, on top of the mate bond the old law had already made. A great feast, the whole city drunk and dancing, my son riding the shoulders of every soldier in turn, and in the quiet after, when Blackmere had settled into being a kingdom with a living king again, instead of a wound, we made the life I had never dared to want. I did not stop being a healer. I want to say that, because it matters, and because there is a version of this story where the healer marries the king and becomes only a queen, and that is not my story. Ronan built me a house of healing in the city, the finest in the realm, with a garden of every herb I could name, and a school where I trained young men and women, common-born, in the craft that had kept a king alive. The first pupils I took were the daughters of the poor, girls who would otherwise have had no craft and no future, because I remembered being a girl who wanted little, because the world meant to give her little, and I decided that in my reign, at least, girls would be allowed to want. I healed in that house with my own hands, until I was too old to hold the needle, and the realm called me the Healer Queen, and I was more proud of that name than of the crown. Ronan ruled Blackmere for a long time, and ruled it well, because a man who has been stripped to nothing and built back up from a river town knows the difference between the crown and the man who wears it, and never once mistook the one for the other. He kept, all his life, the habit he had learned in my house, of splitting his own wood, of doing one plain thing with his hands each day, of being, for an hour, only Ronan and not the king. I would find him at it in the palace yard, in his shirt sleeves, an axe rising and falling, and I would stand and watch him, the way I had watched him that first winter, and he would look up and catch me watching, and grin, and it was the winter again, every time. Emrys grew. My river-born, fearless, honey-demanding boy grew into a young man with his father's grey eyes and his father's low voice, and his teachers despaired of it, and I secretly rejoiced at it, his mother's stubbornness. He would be a good king one day, I thought, watching him. Better than good, because he had been raised for 2 years by a frightened healer at the edge of the world, who had taught him, without meaning to, that the smallest and least mapped places are worth as much as any throne, and because he had been raised after that by a father who had learned the same lesson from a knife and a river. We had more children, in time, 2 daughters, both of whom had the wolf strong in them, both of whom I trained in the healing craft before they could ride, because I would not have a child of mine grow up, not knowing how to save a life. Our house was loud and warm and honey-scented and full, and every so often I would stop in the middle of it and be unable to breathe for a moment, at the size of the thing I had almost refused. I would look at the 3 of them, and then the 4, and then the 5 of us, tumbled together in the golden light of a hall I had been too frightened to walk into, and I would think of the small, silent house on the river, where I had once decided that wanting nothing was the safest way to live, and I would forgive that frightened woman, gently, the way you forgive a child who did not yet know better. She had kept us alive, after all. She had simply not believed, yet, that we were allowed to be happy. Because I had, you understand. That is the part I want you to carry out of this story, if you carry anything. I had held all of this in my hand once, on a last winter night, in a house not on any map. And I had said no. No, to protect him. No, to protect myself. No, because I had decided long ago that wanting more than the world means to give you is a fast road to grief, and I had built my whole small safe life on that no, and it had very nearly cost all three of us, everything. The silence I kept for 3 years, the title I never spoke, the father I nearly denied my son, and the mate I nearly denied myself. All of it grew from that one frightened no, and it was undone, in the end, not by my courage but by 12 grey riders who came up a river road asking for a king, and by a man who was done not asking twice. There is a portrait, in the great hall of Blackmere, that the whole court came to see when it was unveiled. It is not the usual sort of royal portrait. No throne, no crown, no stiff arrangement of a king and his family in their finest. It is Ronan in his shirt sleeves in the palace yard, an axe in his hand, laughing, and me beside him with dirt on my apron, and a healer's needle case at my belt, and Emrys between us, and I had wanted it that way, had insisted on it over the painter's horror, because I wanted the realm, and every king who came after, to see the truth of what we were, not a crown and its ornament, but a woodcutter, and a healer who had been given, against all the odds a river could throw at them, the whole of each other. Ronan had laughed when he saw it. "You've made me a peasant in my own throne room," he said, delighted. "I've made you honest," I told him, and he could not argue with that, and did not try. I named a daughter for the river, in the end. Thorn. Ronan raised an eyebrow at it, and I told him the truth, that the river had taken everything from him and then given him to me, that it had been cruel, and it had been a road home, that most true things are both, and that I wanted at least one of our children to carry the name of the water that had brought her father to my door, half dead in the flood season, so that our family would never forget that the best thing that ever happened to us arrived looking exactly like the worst. He kissed me and said the name was perfect. He usually agreed with me. I usually deserved it. I am old now, telling you this. Ronan is gone these 2 years. He died as he had lived, quietly, in his own bed, with my hand in his, and the axe still leaning in the palace yard where he'd left it, and I did not weep the way I thought I would, because the bond does not truly break, and I can feel him still, the way you feel warmth from a fire in the next room. Emrys sits the storm-grey throne now, and sits it well, and his own children point at the banners, and call them home, and none of them will ever have to be a secret. My house of healing still stands. The girls I trained have trained girls of their own. The river valley is on the maps now. I saw to that. I would not have Thornwick forgotten. And there is a healer there still, in my old herb house. And travellers who fall in the thorn are pulled out and mended. And I like to think that somewhere in that mending, the old story goes on. For 9 months I carried a king's child and called him no one, and it was the silence that nearly cost me everything. I have told you the silence so that you will know the ending, that the silence broke, that the truth came up the river road on the backs of grey horses, that a frightened healer who had trained herself to want nothing learned, too late and just in time, that to want everything and to say so out loud. My son has his father's eyes. My daughters have the wolf. My name is on the maps, and the river that took a king from the world and gave him to me runs on, as it always did, saying the only thing it ever said, which I understand now, was never a warning at all. It was an invitation, and I said yes. In the end, I said yes.